Welcome. What you are about to hear will change the way you see your paycheck, your grocery bill, your gas tank, and your government. This is not a political opinion. This is not a political opinion. This is not a partisan argument. This is the money trail. And the money trail does not lie. Every single day, millions of ordinary Americans wake up and face the same quiet crisis. The numbers do not add up. The paycheck comes in and disappears before the month is over. The grocery cart gets a little smaller each week. The choices get harder every month. Heat or food, rent or medicine, save for the future or survive the present. And at the exact same time, on the other side of an invisible wall that most Americans never see, a small group of people are having a very different experience. Their portfolios are growing. Their bonuses are increasing. Their companies are posting record profits quarter after quarter. Their lobbyists are busy in Washington making sure that the conditions that created those profits continue indefinitely into the future. The question that nobody on your television is asking is this: is there a connection between those two realities? Between your empty grocery cart and their overflowing bank accounts? Between your financial struggle and their financial triumph? Between the life you are living and the system they had built? The answer is yes. And today we are going to prove it. We are going to follow the money from the moment it leaves your paycheck, as taxes through the federal budget into the defense industry, and back out again into the pockets of the people who have engineered one of the greatest transfers of wealth in American history, all funded by war, all justified by fear, all built on a foundation that the American public was never fully told the truth about. Here is what most Americans do not realize. The United States federal budget is not a neutral document. It is a political document. It reflects choices, conscious, deliberate choices made by people with power about who gets resources and who does not. And for the past several decades, those choices have consistently favored one group of Americans over another. The group that has consistently won is the defense industry and the financial interests surrounding it. The group that has consistently lost is the American working class. And the mechanism that has allowed this transfer to continue year after year, administration after administration, is war. Or more precisely, the permanent threat of war. The permanent state of military engagement. The permanent justification for spending that benefits a small number of people at the direct expense of the many. Over the next 30 minutes, we are going to show you exactly how this works. We are going to name names. We are going to cite numbers. We are going to connect dots that the powerful spend enormous resources making sure you never connect. Because the moment you connect those dots, the moment you truly understand the relationship between the war economy and your grocery bill, you become a different kind of citizen. And a different kind of citizen is the one thing the system cannot survive. Stay with me, because what comes next is going to make a lot of things suddenly make sense. Let us start with a number: $8 trillion. That is the estimated total cost of American wars in the Middle East since 2001, according to the Cost of War Project at Brown University. $8 trillion spent over roughly 20 years fighting wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and across the broader region. $8 trillion is an almost incomprehensible sum. So let us make it comprehensible sum. So let us make it comprehensible. $8 trillion is enough to give every single American household approximately $60,000 in cash. Every household. Right now. Paid off. Done. $8 trillion is enough to eliminate all student debt in the United States 3 times over with money left to spare. It is enough to rebuild every road, bridge, water system, and power grid in America. It is enough to fund universal health care for every American for the next 20 years. It is enough to end homelessness in the United States permanently and still have trillions remaining. That money existed. It was collected from American taxpayers. It was borrowed against the future earnings of American workers and their children and their grandchildren. And it did not go to any of those things. It went to war. It went to the weapon systems, the military contractors, the private security companies, the logistics firms, the intelligence contractors, and the financial institutions that fund and profit from permanent military engagement. And here's the part that should make every working American stop and think. While that money was being spent on war, the infrastructure of American working life was being quietly hollowed out. School budgets were cut, hospital systems were strained, mental health services were defunded, public housing was neglected. The social safety net was frayed thread by thread, and the people at the top of the defense industry were getting extraordinarily and historically rich. Lockheed Martin, the largest defense contractor in the world, in the years following the beginning of the war on terror, Lockheed Martin's annual revenue more than doubled. Their executives collected hundreds of millions of dollars in personal compensation. Their shareholders watched the stock price climb year after year. Raytheon, manufacturer of missiles, drones, and precision weapon systems. Their revenues grew from approximately $16 billion in 2001 to nearly $67 billion in recent years. That growth was not driven by innovation or by serving American consumers. It was driven entirely by war contracts paid for by American taxpayers: Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing Defense, Halliburton, DynCorp, SAIC, L14.L Dofort, SAIC, L3 Technologies, Every single one of these companies saw extraordinary profit growth during the years of American military engagement in the Middle East. Every single one employs armies of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Every single one makes large campaign contributions to politicians on both sides of the aisle. And every single one has a profound financial interest in making sure that American military engagement in the Middle East does not end. Because when the wars end, the contracts end. And when the contracts end, the profits end. And the profits ending is the one outcome that the defense industry will spend any amount of money to prevent. $8 trillion went from your pocket to theirs. That is not an accusation. That is arithmetic. Now let us connect this directly to your grocery bill. Because this is where the story stops being about numbers on a page and starts being about the choices you make in the store every single week. The United States federal budget is not infinite. Every dollar that goes into it from your taxes and from government borrowing is a dollar that has to be allocated somewhere. And the choices made in that allocation process have direct and measurable consequences for your daily life. When $800 billion per year goes to military spending, that is $800 billion that is not available for other things. Not available for the prescription drug price negotiation that could save American families thousands of dollars a year. Not available for the childcare subsidy that could allow more parents to work. Not available for the housing assistance that could keep more families in their homes. Not available for the school funding that could give American children the education they deserve. These are not hypothetical losses. These are real programs that were cut, underfunded, or never created because the money was already committed to military spending. The federal budget is a zero-sum game. When one thing gets more, something else gets less. And for decades, military spending has gotten more while the programs that serve ordinary working Americans have gotten less. But the connection between the war economy and your grocery bill goes even deeper than the federal budget. It goes through the price of oil. Oil is the backbone of the modern economy. It fuels the trucks that deliver your food to the grocery store. It powers the farm equipment that grew that food. It heats the warehouses that stored it. It is embedded in the cost of virtually everything you buy. And the price of oil is directly connected to the political and military situation in the Middle East. When tensions in the Persian Gulf rise, oil prices rise. When military action threatens supply routes, oil prices rise. When sanctions restrict the flow of oil from major producers, oil prices rise. Every military confrontation, every diplomatic crisis, every round of escalation in the Middle East has a direct and measurable effect on what you pay at the pump and at the grocery checkout. Iran sits on the fourth largest oil reserves in the world. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that borders Iranian territory, carries approximately 20% of all globally traded oil every single day. The permanent military tension between the United States and Iran, the sanctions regime, the naval confrontations, the proxy conflicts, all of this keeps Iranian oil partially constrained from global markets and keeps a constant risk premium baked into global energy prices. Economists estimate that the full normalization of Iranian oil exports would reduce global oil prices meaningfully. That reduction would flow through to lower gasoline prices, lower food prices, lower prices for manufactured goods, lower heating and cooling costs. Real money in the pockets of real American families every single month. Instead, that money stays in the pockets of oil companies and defense contractors. And you pay the difference every time you fill your cart. The war economy is not happening somewhere far away on a television screen. It is happening in your wallet every single day. Now let us talk about how the system sustains itself. Because it does not survive on its own. It requires active and continuous maintenance. It requires political infrastructure. It requires a narrative that keeps the American public supporting or at least not actively opposing the enormous and continuous flow of money from their pockets into the accounts of the defense industry. That infrastructure has three main components: the lobbying system, the revolving door, and the media. Star Wars lobbying. The defense industry spends hundreds of millions of dollars every year lobbying Congress and the executive branch. They employ former generals, former intelligence officials, former congressional staffers, and former cabinet members as lobbyists. These people know the system from the inside. They know which committees matter, which staffers to call, which arguments resonate, and which campaign contributions open which doors. The result is a defense budget that almost never goes down, even when wars end, even when the stated threats diminish, even when military leaders themselves testify before Congress that they have more equipment than they know what to do with. The lobbying machine ensures that the money keeps flowing because the lobbying machine is entirely funded by the money that flows. In 2022, the United States defense budget was $858 billion, the largest in American history. This was not driven by a new existential threat to the United States homeland. It was driven by the lobbying power of an industry that has spent decades embedding itself into the political system so deeply that cutting its budget has become politically impossible regardless of strategic reality. Then there is the revolving door, the phenomenon by which senior government officials leave their positions in defense oversight and immediately go to work for the defense contractors they were previously responsible for regulating and overseeing. A general retires from running military procurement and joins the board of a defense contractor. A Pentagon official leaves government and becomes a senior executive at a weapons manufacturer. A congressional staffer who worked on the Armed Services Committee leaves to lobby for defense companies. This is not illegal. It is standard practice. It is so common that it barely makes the news anymore. And it creates a system in which the people making decisions about defense spending know that their future financial well-being depends on keeping the defense industry profitable and politically protected. The revolving door means that government oversight of the defense industry is conducted by people who are financially tied to the defense industry. The result is a system that serves the industry rather than the taxpayer consistently and reliably. And then there is the media. 6 corporations control approximately 90% of what Americans see, hear, and read every day. These are not journalism organizations. They are entertainment and media conglomerates with boards of directors that include former government officials, defense industry figures, and financial industry leaders. They have advertisers whose profits depend on the current economic and political arrangements. And they operate in a regulatory environment controlled by the very government they are supposed to independently cover. The structural result is a media environment that consistently treats military spending as necessary and beyond serious question, that frames diplomatic solutions as naive or dangerous, and that gives the most airtime to the voices that reliably support the policy framework that the defense industry depends on. None of this requires a conspiracy. It does not require secret meetings or coordinated deception. It is the natural and predictable result of a system in which economic incentives consistently push in one direction. When the people who own the media also benefit from the war economy, the coverage of the war economy will reflect their interests, not because they are evil, because that is how incentives work. Understanding the system does not require cynicism. It requires clarity. And clarity is exactly what the system is designed to prevent. We have been talking about money and systems and political structures. Now let us talk about people. Because behind every number we have discussed today, there are human beings paying a price they did not choose for a system they were never fully told about in service of interests that are not their own. There are the American soldiers, the men and women who volunteered to serve their country, who were sent to wars whose true strategic purposes were never fully disclosed to them or to the American public, and who came home carrying wounds that the country has never adequately addressed. Post-traumatic stress disorder affecting hundreds of thousands of veterans. Traumatic brain injuries from roadside bombs. Chronic pain from injuries sustained in combat. The psychological weight of having participated in conflicts whose justifications turned out to be built on incomplete or manipulated intelligence. The moral injury of having fought and watched friends die for objectives that keep shifting and never quite resolve. Over 20 American veterans die by suicide every single day. Every single day. That number should stop us in our tracks every time we hear it. It should be on the front page of every newspaper every single morning. It is the direct and ongoing human cost of a foreign policy that sends young Americans to war for reasons that have more to do with defense contractor profits and geopolitical positioning than with genuine and clearly defined national security interests. And when those veterans come home, what do they find? A Veterans Affairs system that is chronically underfunded and overwhelmed, mental health services with months-long waiting lists, disability claims that take years to process, homelessness rates among veterans that are a national disgrace. The people who were sent to fight the wars that enrich the defense industry come home to find that the system that sent them has moved on to the next contract, the next deployment, the next justification for the next budget increase. Then there are the American workers, the people who pay taxes every paycheck, who work hard, who follow the rules, who do everything right, and who find themselves unable to afford healthcare, unable to save for retirement, unable to buy a home, unable to give their children the opportunities they were promised. Not because America is not wealthy enough to provide those things, it is the wealthiest nation in human history. But because the wealth has been systematically redirected away from the needs of working people and toward the profits of the industries that are captured the political system, the median American worker has seen their real wages, adjusted for inflation, barely move over 50 years. 50 years of productivity gains, of technological advancement, of economic growth, and the average American worker has almost nothing to show for it. Meanwhile, executive compensation at defense contractors has grown by thousands of percent over the same period. The same economy, radically different outcomes. That is not an accident. That is policy. And then there are the communities. The cities and towns across America where the school is underfunded, where the hospital closed, where the factory shut down and never came back, where the roads are crumbling and the water is not safe, and the young people leave as soon as they are old enough because there is nothing left for them there. These communities are not poor because America cannot afford to fix them. They are struggling because the money that could fix them has been spent on wars and weapons, and the permanent machinery of military engagement that serves a different America than the one they live in. The war economy has a face. It has many faces, and most of them look nothing like the executives collecting 8-figure bonuses at defense contractor headquarters. Most of them look like the families sitting in underfunded schools and overcrowded emergency rooms and crumbling neighborhoods that were sacrificed so that someone else could get very, very rich. So what does it look like when the system is challenged? What happens when diplomacy threatens to replace conflict? When a working agreement threatens to remove the justification for permanent military engagement and the spending that comes with it? We do not need to speculate. We have a clear and recent historical example, the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. A genuine and significant diplomatic achievement in which Iran agreed to extraordinary limitations on its nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of international sanctions and the beginning of economic normalization. Under the agreement, Iran reduced its uranium enrichment capacity by 98%. Under the agreement, Iran reduced its uranium enrichment capacity by 98%. It accepted the most intrusive international nuclear inspection regime ever applied to any country in the world. International inspectors had access to Iranian nuclear facilities around the clock, 7 days a week. Every aspect of Iran's nuclear program was under continuous international monitoring. In exchange, sanctions were eased. Iranian oil began returning to global markets. The Iranian economy began recovering. The Iranian currency stabilized. Businesses began reopening. American companies, including Boeing, signed preliminary agreements to sell aircraft and equipment to Iran. The promise of Iran rejoining the global economy was real, and the benefits for ordinary Americans in the form of lower energy prices and new trade opportunities were beginning to materialize. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed Iran's compliance with the agreement repeatedly and without reservation. Every single inspection, every single report, Iran was in full compliance. For ordinary Americans, the trajectory was positive. For the defense industry, for the regional powers whose influence depended on Iranian isolation, for the political figures whose careers were built on the narrative of permanent Iranian threat, the deal was an existential problem. A working diplomatic solution to the Iran conflict was precisely the outcome they could not afford. And so in May 2018, the United States withdrew from the agreement, not because Iran violated it. The IAEA confirmed it had not. Not because the deal was failing, every metric showed it was working, but because the political interests that depended on its failure were powerful enough and well-connected enough to install a political leadership willing to tear it apart regardless of the strategic, economic, and human consequences. The consequences were immediate and severe and entirely predictable. Iranian inflation soared to record levels. The currency lost most of its value. The economic recovery was completely reversed. The Iranian public, which had genuinely supported engagement with the West and had celebrated the deal as a path to a better future, was humiliated and politically radicalized. Hardliners in Tehran were handed exactly the political ammunition they needed to argue that the United States could never be trusted and that confrontation was the only viable path. Iran began expanding its nuclear program, not because it wanted to provoke conflict, but because the deal that had constrained its program was gone, and the economic benefits that had made the deal worthwhile had been ripped away. The program that had been rolled back to almost nothing began growing again. The inspectors whose presence had provided complete transparency were increasingly restricted. The diplomatic architecture that had taken years to build was dismantled in a matter of months, and the defense industry budgets went up. The military presence in the Persian Gulf was maintained and expanded. The justifications for continued enormous defense spending were restored. The money kept flowing, the profits kept growing, and the American family kept paying more at the pump and at the grocery store and in their tax bill. The destruction of the Iran nuclear deal is not an isolated policy failure. It is a case study in how the war economy protects itself, how it identifies threats to its existence, how it mobilizes the political and media infrastructure it has built over decades to eliminate those threats, and how it does all of this while telling the American public that it is acting in their interest and in the interest of national security. It is not acting in your interest, it never was. And the clearest proof of that is what has happened to your paycheck, your grocery bill, your community, and your country. While the people running this system have gotten richer than any ruling class in the history of human civilization, you know this now. You have always known something was wrong. Now you know what it is and how it works and who is responsible. That knowledge is the beginning of something. What that something becomes is up to you. Shh.